I talk a lot about my PhD. It's genuinely not to brag. It's part of my evidence-based approach, and it's something that you need to understand. I'm Dr. Jonathan Ashong-Lamptey. I work with people leaders to design inclusive organizations, and I'm on a mission to help 1 million people like you to make your workplace inclusive. Get your pen and paper ready, because I'm going to explain the importance of an evidence-based approach to your inclusion efforts. You've heard me say this before, but I talk about my PhD a lot. I've got a PhD from the London School of Economics. I've got a PhD in your problems. I don't say this for vanity. My clients genuinely love it. I was with a new client today, and the head of HR introduced me to a senior executive, and they said, Jonathan's got a PhD from the London School of Economics. It's the academic rigor that they love, but it's not all about the academics. My bio says that I combine academic rigor with commercial expertise, and I lean heavily on this combination as part of an evidence-based approach. This is something that you need to understand, because more and more people are going to be talking about an evidence-based approach to management and for diversity and inclusion moving forward. So what do I mean when I say an evidence-based approach? Doesn't everyone have an evidence-based approach? Well, not really. One of the 7 most predictable mistakes that organizations make on their inclusion journey is they rely on so-called common sense. Things like get a mentor or network more. Or what I've talked about in a previous show is the received wisdom that if we increase the number of people from minority groups in, let's say, the recruitment process, this leads to an increase in employees from minority groups being recruited. The research shows that this isn't always the case. More people from minority groups as decision makers can actually lead to less diversity. Now, one answer that explains this comes from the research. It's the triple threat, and I've talked about this in a couple of shows. Collective threat, where the recruiter doesn't want negative stereotypes of the candidate to reflect on themselves. Competitive threat, where the recruiter considers the candidate to be competition. And then there's favoritism threat, where the recruiter avoids supporting the candidate. Why? Because it's seen to be bias. Now, the point I want to make here is that we need to use a broader source of evidence when we're making decisions. And Rob Briner, who's the professor of organizational psychology at Queen Mary and the scientific director at the Center for Evidence-Based Management, he talks about this a lot, and he describes evidence-based practices as conscientious, explicit, and judicious use of the best available evidence. And that's what we need to do. It's not just about finding the evidence, and it's not just about using the evidence. It's about putting in the right amount of effort to address any obstacles that make this process difficult. I'm going to link to a document that gives a really nice introduction to this topic, but I want to highlight 4 types of evidence that it recommends. Now, the first is from the scientific literature. This is the academic bit. We do research breakdowns here. We present unusual papers to educate and inform you, and also to challenge your way of thinking. Nearly all the time, these are empirical studies. This matters because we can use theory to understand what's going on around us. For example, the triple threat that I mentioned earlier, but we can also empirically test to see if this theory is true, and if so, under what circumstances. This is crucial. The second source of evidence that you need to consider is from the organization itself. Now, this is important because sometimes the research may not apply to your particular circumstances. This is when it's useful to collect your own data, and we talk about this a lot here. We very much encourage you to collect your own data where possible. Do we disregard the research? No. But what you do need to understand is your particular circumstances. One of the 3 biggest problems that organizations experience on their inclusion journey is they lack a business case for diversity for their specific organization. The research is important, but how does it show up where you work? The third source of evidence is stakeholder concerns. And from an inclusion perspective, this is often quite easy because one of the claims of organizations is that they want to represent the customers that they serve. Public service organizations are big on this. Consumer-facing organizations also feel pressure to show how they take diversity and inclusion seriously in their organization. Now, we recognize that here, and we also recognize that often diversity and inclusion is focused on leaders, but it's not all about the leaders. We do not ignore the people at the bottom of the pyramid. It's about understanding the multiple stakeholders. The fourth and final source of evidence that's recommended is professional expertise. This is what everyone relies on right now. Their thoughts, their opinions based on their professional experience. Of course, this should never be dismissed, but it shouldn't be the only source of evidence. Now, you should check these out for yourself, because part of using an evidence-based approach is developing critical thinking. As a regular listener, I'm confident that you're already a critical thinker, but you need to make your own mind up and question the narratives that exist not only in the evidence that's provided, but even in the way that I'm presenting it to you right now. Now, from everything that I'm saying, you can see that it's not easy, but it's a more thorough way of making better decisions. Now, this is a meta conversation that we're having here, but it's important to understand this because it has implications for everything that you do at work. And there's a 6-step process that I recommend that you explore. I won't go into all of these, but I think you should have a look at this in the document in the show notes. And the steps are: ask, acquire, appraise, aggregate, apply, and assess. Now, to put all of this into perspective, the underlying principle here is that the more informed our decisions are, the more likely we are to get the outcomes that we want. And this is what we need to create an inclusive workplace. So let's wrap this up. What are the key messages here? 1. We promote an evidence-based approach to inclusion. 2. An evidence-based approach has 4 key sources of evidence. And 3. An evidence-based approach has 6 key steps that you should use. So what do you think? Are you using an evidence-based approach? Get in touch or leave a message. I would love to hear from you. If you've learned something from today's show, you should sign up to our insider list on our website. It's free and you can stay ahead of the pack and get the best of everything that I produce. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode.